Okay students, so today we are going to be studied of figures of speech, right? We all have heard the name of figures of speech, and we most of us are aware of different kinds of figures of speech also. But in general, what are the figures of speech? A departure. A figure of speech is generally a departure. Departure from what? A departure from the ordinary words. Okay, you have to focus your attention on these words, that a figure of speech is a departure from the ordinary words. This means that we are not interested, a writer is not interested in using the ordinary words. Means there is a separation, there is a departure, there is an absence of simple words, of those ordinary words which are always used by common person, or the words which are used in our daily life, in our routine. So in literature, in an article or in a paragraph, in a stanza, we don't find any kind of ordinary words, but what we find there, a figure of speech, right? So for what there is an absence of ordinary words, or what is the purpose of a writer to use of figures of speech? Generally to produce a greater effect. Okay, to produce a greater effect, a writer always tries to give up the use of ordinary words so that he may produce what? He may produce a greater effect. Means when a writer has to make his writing effective, impressive, then he always prefers to give up the use of ordinary words. So in a very simple language, you can say that figures of speech are a departure from the ordinary words to produce a greater effect. Okay, in general, a figure of speech is a deviation from the ordinary use of words with a view to increasing. Okay, because he has to increase their effect. So it besides giving pleasure, when we find an absence of ordinary words, when we find the works of a writer or the literature, the writing very effective, then it gives us a lot of pleasure. So the another purpose of using the figures of speech is also to give us delight, to give us pleasure. And it giving pleasure, make statements what kind? More impressive, emphatic and moving. So all these are the main characteristics of figures of speech, that by avoiding the use of ordinary words, a writer makes his writing impressive, emphatic, effective and moving, right? And there is an absence, simply you have to be aware of that, there is an absence of the ordinary words. So now the kinds of figures of speech. First of all, most important is simile. Okay, we all are aware of simile. What is a simile? A simile is a comparison. Got? Simile is a comparison between, comparison for what? Comparison is made between two different objects. Okay, different objects. A comparison is made between two things or two person. So that is called a simile, a figure of speech, simile, and it is introduced by such words as like, as, so, or as, so, as. Whenever you find these kinds of words in a line, in a stanza, then you can say that there has been used a figure of speech, what? The simile. Okay, there is a use of a simile, figure of speech. For example, so here you have been provided 3 examples of this figure of speech, simile. For example, as I have told you that there is always the use of these words. For example, like, life is like a dream. Here we find a comparison between two different objects, dream and life. What life is? Life is like a dream. So here you find this word like. This means that here the writer has used simile, figure of speech. Okay, Words are like leaves. Again, a comparison between two objects, but different objects, words and leaves. Words are like leaves, right? Again, like. So here is also figure of speech, simile. Another one is, I wandered lonely as a cloud. Okay, I is compared here with a cloud. That is as. The word as, the comparison between I and cloud, right? I wandered lonely as a cloud. So, in these three sentences, we find that there is a use of simile, figure of speech, right? Another one is metaphor. Metaphor, two things of the different kinds are, okay? Metaphor is also a comparison. Two things, between two things, a comparison between two things of the different kinds. Good. So simile is also a comparison, metaphor is also a comparison, simile is also a comparison between two different objects, and metaphor is also a comparison between two things of different kinds. But words of comparison are not used. So then if you are asked that what is the difference between simile and metaphor? What is the difference between simile and metaphor if both are a comparison? So the difference is that in simile we make a use of these words, but in metaphor there is no use of the words of comparison. For example, life is like a dream, okay, the example from simile, and now the example of metaphor, revenge. Revenge is a kind of wild justice. Revenge is being compared with justice, that is wild justice, but you will find that here we don't use any kind of comparison words. So revenge is a kind of wild justice. Now the third one is personification, and this kind of figure of speech is always used in literature. Personification, when you personify the lifeless things or the lifeless objects. Personification is lifeless objects or abstract ideas are spoken of as having life and intelligence. Means lifeless things are spoken, lifeless things are presented or described as if they have life. Good? As if they have life means even the lifeless things are personified. So you see that there is a personification figure of speech. For example, experience. What is experience? Experience is lifeless idea, lifeless, that is abstract idea, okay. Experience is the best teacher. So here experience is personified. Experience is an abstract idea, but it has been personified as the best teacher. So in this example, in this line, we have what kind of figure of speech? Personification. Another example is jealousy. Okay, jealousy is also an idea, a feeling, abstract feeling. So jealousy is a green-eyed monster. Got? Jealousy is a green-eyed monster. So these are the examples of personification. Fourth one is apostrophe. Apostrophe, what apostrophe is? It is a direct address. Got? It is a direct address to the dead one, or to the absent one, or to a personified object. Means the writer, or there is an address to someone or something, and that person is either dead or absent, and maybe also a personified object. So that kind of figure of speech is always called apostrophe. For example, Milton, right? So here Milton is being addressed. Rome, here Rome is being addressed. So Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. This means that Milton is no more. He is dead. So in this line, who is being addressed? Milton is being address. So this is why that we say that here we find apostrophe figure of speech. Rome got personified. Rome is personified here. Rome, thou hast seen much better days. So in these two examples we find what kind of figure of speech? Apostrophe. The next one is oxymoron. Okay, fifth one is oxymoron. What is oxymoron? The combination of two words of opposite meaning, right? The combination of two words of opposite meaning in one expression. In one expression, for example, our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thoughts. So here you find that is sweetest and saddest. Two words of opposite meaning. Sixth one is onomatopoeia. That is onomatopoeia, the sound of the words. Okay, simply the sound of the words which suggests the sense or meaning. For example, the sound, the snakes are hissing and the bees are buzzing. That is onomatopoeia. Figure of speech is because of hissing and buzzing. So when we find these kinds of sounds of the words that suggest this kind of figure of speech. Seventh one is hyperbole. Hyperbole means when the things are amplified or exaggerated. Okay, then we have this kind of figure of speech. Things are amplified or exaggerated. Things are represented as greater or less, better or worse than they really are. Means things are represented either greater or less, better or worse. But in reality, in actual, they are not so. In reality, they are not so as they are being presented or as they have been described. For example, he sneezed and clouds would break. He sneezed and clouds would break. She wept oceans of tears. Okay, how can it be? Oceans of tears. So in these kinds of sentences we find hyperbole figure of speech. Eighth one is alliteration. Alliteration when the same letter is repeated. Okay, that is alliteration. Alliteration we can say repetition of the letter. The same letter is repeated at the beginning of two or more words in a line. Okay, in a line, either two words or more words are repeated. Got? And that is the same letter. For example, just look here. How high his honor hold his haughty, that is head. How high his honor hold his naughty head. So here we find a repetition of the letter, that is H, 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 H. How high his honor. Then next one, ninth one is metonymy. Metonymy, meta means, okay, meta, that is after, onoma, a name. Substitution of name or transfer of name. Transfer of name, for example, grey hair. Grey hair is always an example of or a symbol for old age. Grey hair are used for old age. So substitution of name, that is metonymy. Throne, okay, crown stands for kingship. And the example of metonymy figure of speech is the pen is more powerful than the sword. Okay, this is the example of metonymy. The next one is, 10th one is transferred epithet. This kind of figure of speech is used by Thomas Gray in Alice Written in a Country Churchyard, and this figure of speech is always used in literature. Mainly, transferred epithet, qualifying adjective, is sometimes transferred from one person or thing to another. Okay, qualifying adjective, and that is transferred from one person to another. From one person to another, he passed a sleepless night. Okay, night is never sleepless, it is the person. He passed a sleepless night, so it is being transferred. Then 11th one is euphemism. Euphemism, it consists in the description of a disagreeable thing by an agreeable name. Means we can say artificial elegance of language. In short, euphemism is artificial elegance of language. For example, he has fallen asleep. Okay, we are not saying that he is dead or he is no more, but what we say, this is the elegance of language. What we say, he has fallen asleep. So that is called euphemism. Don't tell me a fairy tale. You can say simply don't tell a lie, got, but you are using, if you use this kind of figure of speech, you will always write, you will always say don't tell me a fairy tale. Then 12th one is antithesis. It is also, most of the time it is also used, and we also find this kind of figure of speech in literature. Antithesis. Anti means that is against, and thesis that is plans. In this one idea, okay, antithesis, one idea is set against another, or one word is set against another. When second part of a sentence contrasts with the first, means the second part of a sentence always goes against with the of the first one. A striking opposition, we can say a contrast of words, and this kind of contrast of words is always made in the same sentence. Okay, same sentence, but we find there a contrast or an opposition, that is called antithesis. A contrast between two things. In a very simple language, if you want to understand what is antithesis, you can say that it is a contrast between two things. And for example, there are so many examples of this kind of figure of speech. Now you find that we have a same sentence, right? We have only one sentence, but we find here a contrast, a striking opposition. Means we find that the second part of this sentence is going against of the first part of this sentence. For example, united we stand. United we stand, right? Divided we fall. United, divided. Stand, fall. Silver, gold, speech, silence. So in this way we find this kind of striking opposition. United we stand, divided we fall. Speech is silver, silence is gold. Many are called, but few are chosen. Many, few. Called, chosen. To err is human, to forgive divine. Man proposes, God disposes. It is all these are the example of antithesis. Give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. Okay, every man, few, ear and voice. Then the next one is epigram. In epigram, a brief pointed saying frequently. Okay, a brief pointed saying but frequently, introducing what? Antithetical ideas. Antithetical ideas which excite what? Which excite surprise, and it always catch our attention. Okay, arrest attention, it always get our attention immediately because it surprises us. For example, the child is father of the man. So here we find epigram figure of speech because it is arresting our attention very quickly. It is this kind of idea is going to surprise us. Art lies in concealing art. So here you find a brief pointed saying. The fool doth think he is wise. The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. So we find here again a surprise. Next one is pun. So this kind of figure of speech, when we used the same word in two or more senses, okay, the same word in two senses or maybe more, in order to make the people laugh. What is the purpose of using this kind of figure of speech, pun? To make the people laugh, and for that we use the same word in two senses. For example, is life worth living? Is life worth living? And what we say, the same, it depends upon the liver. So now when we go to the second part of this sentence, it makes us laugh. An ambassador is a gentleman who lies abroad for the good of his country. So here you find there is a lot of fun. So that is the figure of speech, pun.